Hello everyone, and welcome to the Jim Kroft Podcast. I'm buzzing with excitement to introduce today's special guest, Arvid Kahl. When I set out on my podcasting adventure, I had a hunch that somewhere at the intersection between entrepreneurship and the arts, a universe of untapped knowledge awaited, ready to enrich both realms. If I could synthesize the human embodiment of what a person might look like at this mysterious confluence, it would be Arvid Kahl. Having secured $1 million exit for his business with partner Daniela, Arvid pivoted towards creativity, so far releasing 2 best-selling books and amassing 120,000 Twitter followers along the way. Today's story, however, delves beyond the surface of the success and the metrics. In the podcast, we explore how this indie founder overcame social isolation, burnout, and workaholism to find a deeper spiritual center. On that journey, Arvid not only found his way to creativity, but pulled in his experience as an indie bootstrapper to build a bulletproof content creation system. This system has helped him not only attain extraordinary consistency, but also grow one of the most vibrant and engaged audiences on Twitter. A man of gentleness, charisma, and extraordinary willingness to give, Arvid packs today's podcast with actionable steps, practical tips, and hard-hitting life lessons. Whether a solopreneur or a creative, it's jam-packed with inspirational ideas about how to distribute your message across newsletters, podcasts, and social media. Are you ready? Then let's dive in. Arvid, how are you doing?
It's so nice being here. That's awesome.
It's such a pleasure to meet you, and I've been so lucky to have met some people. I believe you're very close with KP, who's introduced us, and I just want to say before we go in, thank you. I think with leadership, it's always such an extraordinary thing when you come across people who have this degree of leadership, but then are really willing to give their time to people coming through, starting out on new projects, and that really blows my mind that you live by that.
Well, I really appreciate it. And I have to say, like, there's always, I don't know if I could even phrase it that way, but there's a selfishness to selflessness in a way, right? Because me spending my time with you, I don't just do that because I have nothing else to do. I value you and your efforts that you're currently putting into building in public. And by talking to you, I get to benefit from our relationship. And over time, we can do stuff together. So there's something in this for me as well. And I think the same goes for KP and everybody else who's doing active work on social media. You know, it's kind of the selfless selfishness or the selfish selflessness. There's always two sides to the story. And I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, there is. And I also think that, I think there's this sort of modern illusion of altruism for altruism's sake. And the thing is I think we come from a certain space. And for me, it's like that link between give and get is it's a beautiful idea, and to take ownership of that circle. But, you know, I think that a lot of people look upwards all the time. And I love the fact that you guys are really like raising your community. It just seems to get so much joy out of it.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, looking upwards is boring. I think there's I think looking around me is what I really enjoy in every single way, right? When I was just a developer a couple years ago, I was looking at other developers and it was interesting, but there was something to entrepreneurs, and I was not an entrepreneur at that time, but there were these people who they had the same mindset. They wanted to solve problems, but not just on a computer. They wanted to do it like through a business. They wanted to actually impact other people's lives. And now I see artists wanting to solve the problem of musical expression, like the stuff that you're doing. And I feel it is so much more interesting to live my life being a person that is acting in public by interacting with other people that have other things to do than I do, right? That gives me more meaning, gives me more perspectives on stuff. The reason I feel this is a selfish thing is because I'm going to learn something from you here today. I'm not just going to, you're not just going to ask me questions and I'm going to teach you stuff. No. I'm going to learn something from you. And everybody who's listening is going to learn something from both parties. That's the benefit of all this, right?
Well, that's something that I love when you're talking about on your podcast, because you're talking about when you're podcasting people as a form of audition for ideas. And then I know that you have sort of a endless Notion document that you slot everything into. So why don't you just, if I can ask you about, so what's your process as you dive into the world when you are, you know, how do you look, how do you find stuff, and in what way do you process that?
So right now I consider myself to be more of a writer than anything else, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
still entrepreneurial. I'm still a software engineer, really. I still run a little software as a service company, but just very passively on the side. Most of my time goes into writing, and I guess most of writing is actually thinking and has very little to do with the
Right.
act of writing. I think
Mm-hmm.
you as a musician, you know that perfectly well,
Sure.
right? It's like the
Sure.
writing part, as important it is to put the notes down on paper, that's not how the notes happen, right? The
Right.
melodies, the harmonies, they happen through experimentation. They happen through just feeling them somewhere in your brain, right? That's how that happens. And it's the same for me for writing. I spend a lot of time just talking to people about their problems, their ideas, and I find things that I find personally interesting enough to think about, to put my own spin on, to take my own expertise and experience from the past and pull that all together into what to me is now one big piece of content, if that is not the most boring way of describing it, but one kind of insight, right? Every week I want to produce one big piece of insight and an interview, and that is kind of what I want to do. I want to have one big conversation and one big piece of insight, and those two are put on my podcast, into my newsletter, into my blog. What else do I have? I have a YouTube channel, I guess.
Yep.
I put it all on Twitter. I post the full things on Twitter because I feel the more I can spread my thoughts, the more other people get to benefit, and eventually there's some monetary compensation or whatever. But my process really is I write a lot. I write in the beginning of the week, I edit in the middle of the week, I record at the end of the week, and I distribute on Friday. That's kind of my process every single week.
And so this is something that really interests me, especially because you're coming from the tech sector originally, and you have this spirit within you of teaching, which I think seems to sort of go back, and I believe that your partner Danielle, like that she's a teacher, but this is such a fascinating journey for me that you've come from the tech world and from the coding world, and then you've gone into teaching and the business, and then into becoming a creative in your right in so many ways. So I know there's loads to talk about there, but I just wanted to dive a little bit deeper for a moment, because a lot of my audience are artists and start out solopreneurs, people who are just kind of trying to get into things. And one of the things that really interests me about your approach is this ritualization of your creative approach. And the reason that I find that interesting of it is that for many of us in the creative arts, we have it's let me put it like this: I've noticed there's a distinction between, let's say, creating art and content creation. And one of the things that I really notice in the content creation side, and that isn't say one's better or worse, by the way, it's just a slight difference. And within content creation, I've noticed that people have a sort of form of ritualization about what they do, which of course people do in the arts, but it's more widescreen, and it's more dipping into, trying to talk about, Beethoven talking about the music of the spheres. Lennon talked about that as well. And something that, and I've always kind of been like that, sort of living with that slight chaos that artists have of whatever project is on. I'm going after that, and I'm absolutely going after it. And the reason that I've come to this point in my life, which has paradoxically and interestingly led me to build in public, is that I'm trying to create order within my process, and that's why I find this ritualization. And so you said it all starts with writing, and then you're distributing from there. So can you just go a little bit deeper into your process in the week, because you have certain targets in the week that you're aiming for, and it's just to go a little bit deeper into the how behind why you do that.
Yes. Well, before I get to this, and I will get to this, one reason why I need that structure in my life is because I guess other people would call it laziness. I just call it being easily distracted, or, not easily compliant with anything. I'm just not a fan of structure for the sake of structure. But I found that if I want to be consistent, and that's kind of what you touched upon here, right?
Yeah.
Like where people
very much
consistently produce something which has these cumulative effects, and it's a self-sustaining things that if you only have chaos, you will never have. But if you put some consistency into your work, you could. So that consistency is something that I need to force in my own life. Because if I were just to say, oh, maybe I'm going to write, maybe I'm not going to have a weekly readership. I'm not going to have a listenership or viewership, right? So I need that consistency. And for that consistency to appear, I built accountability systems. And that accountability system to me is I need something, because I have a newsletter going out on Friday. That's how that all started for me. We built a business. We built Feedback Panel. Daniela and I. She was an online teacher at the time. She's actually a studied opera singer. She has a master's degree in opera. She's a musician, as you can probably tell from me being in her office at this point, because my office is being refurbished. Like, this is not my guitar. I don't know how to play the guitar. What I do know how to play is the accordion. Cool. It looks really cool. Hey, I'm German, right? So obviously I play the accordion. And I just want to bring this little anecdote here. I'm just going to go all over the place. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to get to the actual
I got to interrupt you because I had this ordered things. There's so much I want to speak about, and then I'm like, it's like, oh man, this is flowing. Just forget the notes and roll with it. So fun.
I saw your notes earlier. You posted them on Twitter, and I was like, nope, that's not gonna happen. But I will give you the space to go into your notes. But I'm just gonna throw this in here. I know what it means to build, I guess, expertise on an instrument musically. So maybe that's something that people can relate to. Coding is the same. Writing is the same. It's a skill you learn to express yourself in a certain way, right? If you tell a machine how to solve a problem, that is a form of self-expression. If you write a text for people to understand, self-expression. If you create a song, if you create music, same thing. And I learned how to play the accordion as a kid. And why did I learn how to play the accordion, this best instrument of them all? Well, the reason is that I went to accordion school three times a week. I went there. I learned to play the really boring, cheap songs in the beginning. And I got better. I learned how to play with both hands, right? I learned how to read music, how to play music from while seeing it on the notes or whatever. It was a process. It was a process of getting better slowly over time. That's what is leading me to become better at what I was doing, because I'm not a writer. I'm not a native English speaker. I don't know how to speak English or how to write English. I didn't know when I started with this. I was just a software engineer who kind of struck it big with building a business that actually succeeded, right? That's where I was. So I decided I need something to, fill my time, because we had just sold the business. And I decided to write because I'd learned so much from people and I wanted to give back. So I started writing. But when I started writing, I noticed that this is fun, but if I just post it whenever I feel like it, I'm going to stop in a couple of weeks and I'm going to go back to playing, I don't know, World of Warcraft or something. And I didn't want that, right? I felt like this is good. Like teaching people how to business, that was something that for the first time gave me meaning beyond just making money. It was meaning by putting my thoughts, my knowledge into the world and have other people benefit from that. And I didn't want to mess it up for myself. So I put an accountability system into my life. That was the newsletter. Because the moment the first person signed up for my newsletter, I knew that every Friday at 9 a.m, there needed to be a couple thousand words of something that taught this person and all the other people after that person something meaningful for their entrepreneurial or creator journey. So that's why I have the regiment. Now let's get to the regiment. Or do you want to? Do you have something to ask?
You know what?
In
since you're going off on this jazz tangent, I'm going to go on to the jazz tangent as well. Because,
sure, let's go.
Because I'm really interested in where the structure came from. So that's very interesting that there's that musical link going there. But I'm also very interested because in where if the accountability system came from your experiences of what you learned in coding and in business, and that's on one side. And just to say, the reason I asked that question, because I was stuck on editing a documentary that I'd shot, which was, I'd been in 2016, I was shooting a documentary, bootstrapping a documentary, I would say, on the 2016 election with Trump, the historical election between Trump and Clinton. And when I came back, some time passed, and usually when I got a project, I'm hot and I go in for it and I really dive in and I capture the momentum. But I got back and so much happened in my life and I was so busy that I lost the flow of it, and then other jobs and all the things that happened. I started having an album came out called Love in the Face of It, and I just couldn't get to this documentary. So I thought, right, I got to kind of like change my daily discipline, started going to an office every day, which was a shared office. And I tell you, I went into this office and I was like, man, most of them were coders and hackers. And they were in there and they were just, these guys and girls were just so focused in a way like I'd never seen. And they used to go in there and they'd have their 3 screens and it would be like the Millennium Falcon. And they'd just go in there and then that would be it. And you'd see them kind of 15 hours later. And they returned me my own discipline. So I'm just wondering about if you brought some of that into your creative system, if you like.
100%. Yes, 100%. You should see my office right now. There's like a big screen here. There's a big screen there. There's a screen right in front of me because I'm using a teleprompter to be able to see you when I talk to you. And there's a screen below to see what my camera is seeing. It's like, this is also the Millennium Falcon is ready to launch. So this is still part of my life, even as a writer. But
You got to post a picture of that tomorrow. Build in public.
I can take one. Yeah,
Please
sure,
do.
no problem. It's recording in public. So one thing that I noticed that I was particularly good at as a developer, as a software engineer, was really tunnel visioning on the solution of any particular problem. That's kind of what attracts people into coding, right? You get your task and you kind of hammer away at the code until it actually works, which most of the time it doesn't. Then you spend like 4 hours looking for like a comma that you wrote in the wrong spot or something. That's mostly coding. Coding is just hunting for the weird character that got away. That's really what it is. For most people. Like there are people who are above this, but they are rare in number and they're well paid and they all work at Google. So not most people, they don't get this. But coding is really like solving an issue and by focusing as much as you can. And the thing is for coding, and this is maybe a mental model that can be really helpful. You have the code, right? The code is the thing you type. But what you actually have in the code is just a reflection of the whole thing that you built up in your mind. Like if you build a program, you build the program in your mind. You see like what needs to go where, what data comes in where, what it needs to look like to go to the other place. Like, if you have a dialogue that you have on a website or something, well, where do I open the dialogue? What parts are in the dialogue? What does the button say? All of this is in your mind. And then you kind of write it down for the computer to make it actually happen. But you built this mental model. And for this mental model of the whole program, you usually need a lot of time to assemble it in your mind, which is why all those people in most co-working spaces where people code have headphones on and just tunnel vision into their thing because they are keeping the mental model alive. That's what it is. They're not just going from project to project. Like that switching cost, that's kind of, what is it, all tabbing between mental models. That's not happening for most people. Like if that were to happen, all mental models would just fall apart. And I found that this works for me as a writer too, which is why I don't just, write and then record and then write some more and maybe do some other stuff. When I write, I focus on the writing, which is why Monday is my writing day. It's my not do anything else day. I do some Twitter because I'm an addict, but Monday is for writing because I start writing. I have an idea of a topic I want to write about. I'm one of these people that think as they speak, as you can probably tell. Yeah. And so I start writing. I sometimes even just dictate something into my phone and get the transcript and work from there. And then an idea comes, a draft happens, and then a second version happens. And then usually by the end of the day, sometimes an hour after I start, sometimes 5 hours after I start, you never know, I'm done with my thing. And that thing, then I mull it over the next 2 days. Maybe there are a couple changes here or there, but that is the thing for the week. So I really focus on making the thing.
Arvid, so I really want to know about what happens in the rest of the week. And I'm just interrupting there because I really want to know a little bit more about the Monday process, first of all, because just to get into the detail and dive into that a little bit more. Because so you talked about battling that sort of laziness. So you use structures and systems to battle the laziness, which we all have, And so what are your triggers so let's say you're an artist and it's something we all struggle is just to get down to it, and we've all got that potential to get into that flow once we get into it, but sometimes there's all types of mental blocks, and then sometimes you get into a bad way of being where you can't get to it several days, and then suddenly people can confine themselves in depression cycles or resistance cycles, which are really serious. So I'm just interested in, okay, you wonderfully sort of said, yeah, well, I've got a bit of that sort of laziness stuff as well. And yet, on the other side, you've got this extraordinary consistency, which is so wonderful. So you figured out in your life the relationship between that laziness and that resistance and the act of getting down and doing and getting into it. But let's say you're waking up on the most rotten Monday morning and you're not feeling like it, and you got your system there. But how do you transition into that space, because you don't seem to ever miss a week? So but I bet you feel sometimes that resistance or that old laziness bet. And I'm just wondering about, okay, what goes on in your mind psychologically in that space? How do what hacks or spiritual things do you dive into to get you into your process?
Oh, there's so much that I can reply here. I'm going to try and keep all of that in my mind and not get distracted.
Follow it. Let it go. Yeah.
I start every day by walking my dog. Like, we have a puppy. She's a year and a half. So I have a routine of starting my day. Like I feed the dog. She looks at me hungry. I feed her some more. She's less hungry, but now she wants to walk. So I grab her. I put on a Star Trek podcast, and I just walk her around the neighborhood. That's my ritual in the morning. That's what I do every morning at like 7:30 or something. The dog has her own.
And that's about peace, because it's Star Trek
it's
is
a
about
reset.
something fun for you. Lovely.
That's right. I'm resetting my professional life to anything professional comes after this. Right now, I'm here with my pup and with my Star Trek comedy podcast that I listen to. It's really enjoyable. It's called The Greatest Generation, and I highly recommend it for everybody who likes Star
my
Trek.
heart like warms just at you and your pup and the Star Trek. It's just
Yes.
but I love that because you've had this $1 million exit and you've got this extraordinary thing, and then I'm like, oh, but that's so lovely.
Yeah, but I need that. I'm one of these people. Like I think my love languages are physical touch and acts of service. That's how you can get to me. And the puppy
love
is the perfect.
That's
perfect,
so nice.
Well, you know, like I used to be a person that doesn't believe in anything kind of spiritual or esoterical. Danielle fortunately showed me that it doesn't have to be like woo-woo to be meaningful to me. Like it can just be, you know, accepting that I'm an emotional human being and that I have certain needs and that these needs need to be fulfilled, and I can, you know, align my life to have fulfillment in these needs. And the puppy is one of these things. Like whenever I want to cuddle and Danielle is not close by, I grab the pup, big cuddle, and we both have a great time because she likes it too, which is fortunate. Like it would be very sad if she didn't like cuddles, but she seems to enjoy it. And it's the same with the walk in the morning, right? She needs to walk and I need to reset. So that's how I start my day. I have my reset, I come back, the dog just does her own thing. Usually she jumps on the couch where she's totally not allowed to be and just spends a couple hours. But I go into the office, which is the next part. I go into a room that is for work, which is this place. I don't work from the couch. I don't work from the bed. I don't work from outside, even though sometimes if the weather is nice, I grab a laptop, sit outside and do some stuff. But this room here where I am right now, which is hilarious because I guess in a couple of weeks, I'm going to move into the basement where we're just finishing my real office. But the room that my computers are in is the room where I work and not much else, right? This is a workspace. And that flips a switch in my mind as to you just left your personal life behind the door, which is also a lockable door, right? And then, not that anybody would come knocking. I'm the only one at home. The dog, but she just whines, and then I do her bidding, whatever she wants. But you know, like if there were people, they would see I'm working. I even have an on-air sign when I do podcasts that I have a remote and I switch it on. So anybody who might be in the house sees that there's a need for me to not have anybody trample around, but that rarely happens. But I have a space for this. And my mind figured out over the last, I guess, where I'm at like 3 years of doing this now, that when I come into this room, I'm a different person than the person that just walked outside. Obviously I'm not, but the persona shifts to the professional. And even if my day is kind of bad, I know that, well, I've done this where I'm at like episode 237. I've done this 237 times before. I'm probably going to be able to pull another one and do like episode 238. And why that is the case, even on those bad Mondays, is that I've done something the Friday before or the Thursday before. I prepared. Like I can give you an example of I use the time when I'm really good at stuff, when I feel flow, when I feel like I could write for hours, then I tend to actually use the time and do more work in anticipation of that Blue Monday one day that doesn't work for me. Yep. So like there was a couple weeks ago, I used audio pen. That's a tool that I use. It's just kind of you talking to your phone.
I'm an early adopter. Big shout out to Luis Pereira.
Yeah. I just had him on. I had a podcast conversation with him yesterday. I'm going to have him on my show very soon.
We're
talked
always
about
bantering on Twitter.
Yeah, and he's also such a great guy, such a humble person too. It's crazy, but that's just building public Twitter is mostly humble people trying to do the best of their inability to allow themselves to celebrate their life, right? But that's a whole different story. But I'm using audio pen just to quickly get a couple thoughts out, and I was in such a flow state that I got like 5 or 6 articles. I narrated them like 15 minutes each. I just yelled into my microphone because I had just so many ideas and they were all in that flow state, right? I was in a really creative space and I knew this creative space is not going to last. So might just as well take it. And I yelled and yelled and yelled. And now I have content for 5 weeks. Because all of this is so far done that anything to turn that little audio note into an article is just me, following my own guidance that I gave myself a couple weeks in the past. So I use those days relentlessly. When I feel that I have creativity coming up, I give myself the time and space to use it. And the way I give myself the time and space is by having a completely empty calendar. Like my calendar this week is like 3 things, one of which is this conversation.
Amazing.
Anything around this is time for me to find, yeah, you're welcome, but I really wanted to have it, right? So anything I want to do is on my calendar, and anything I don't want to do just doesn't get on there, because I need the space around these events to allow myself to find the time to write. And then I write. Most of the time, Monday is more like sometimes I just write something completely new. But on occasion, I just take something from my backlog of, you said it earlier, 1,000 ideas, some of which are just a title, many of which are a couple of notes that I scribbled together, and a couple dozen of which are almost ready. Almost ready articles. I just would need to like write them out in a way. But I tend to write something new because there's always something going on in our community. But that's how that Monday works for me every single Monday, because if it's good, it works. And if it's a bad Monday, I have something prepared.
And did you find, just again to rewind, because I'm enjoying the sort of dynamism between space and time that we're having here. So to go back, when you sold Feedback Panda, from my understanding, even though it was going so well and $55,000, I think, MRR, which is amazing, and you had this big exit. But I know that you bootstrapped it, and that you guys had done it all yourself, and were just taking care of all the customers and all the rest of it. And I know there was some burnout floating around from what I've read. And so I'm interested, I want to go back to the system of your week, but I just think there's so many dynamic and interesting sort of like aspects about where you've got to, that it includes the back. So it's a bit of a funny podcast, because I think we understand we're existing in this time and space continuum, and what we are is forward and back and present. And well, you're a Trekkie, so you're well into that, I think.
Yeah, of course.
But this is the thing. So you go back, and there was some burnout. So I'm just quite interested about you. So you started the newsletter, and when you burnt out, I would imagine, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I'd imagine there was, on the one hand, a relief to have the space, and I'm sure there was a good feeling from making the sale. But also, when you've been so busy and had such a mission, and you've got burnout, sometimes that can lead to a low afterwards. So 2 questions there. Did the burnout come afterwards with an accompanying low? And secondly, was your gravitation towards writing and to the creative side, and just a natural flow out of the state of where you found yourself, having exited this amazing business that you created, and I guess a hole there as well?
Yeah. Oh, well, there was a hole. There was a vacuum right there. But let me start with why I got into a burnout state. I was just so stressed. I was hyper anxious. I was completely overworked from just being the only technical person in a business. So my burnout wasn't really it wasn't one of these where you don't find meaning in your work anymore kind of burnout, and you burn out from the pointlessness of it all. It was really burnout from just being on 24/7 or 23/7, that kind of, a lot of time, always having really high stress levels because something might happen, and I always needed to be on to be able to respond as quickly as possible. It was from that I found, once we sold the business and transitioned it out, of course there was a hole. Something was gone, right? They ripped the business away from us, something that we built with our hearts and our full lives for years, and now somebody else was operating it, and we had nothing to do with it anymore.
So weird psychologically.
It's really bizarre. It's bizarre in a way that everybody tells you about it, and you just still don't believe them until it happens to you. Because of course it's not a baby, it's not a person, not a human being. It doesn't love you back, but it is an effort that you made it grow. And I think the human psychology treats it as a child, as offspring, even though it's not, because you do the same thing to a business. Like you give it all you love, you put in time, extra effort, you get up at night because it's yelling at you. It's just a service being down. It's not a baby being hungry, but for you, it's the same thing. You get up because you need to tend to the thing, right? So there is this kind of parent-child dynamic, and it's kind of like you would be giving up a 6-7-year-old child for adoption. That's kind of how it felt. Obviously, I've never done this, so it is a purely illustrative example here. But the idea,
but there's the
same,
loss,
right?
isn't it?
Yeah, it is grief. It is active grief at that point, that you feel like you've lost something and you wish you still had it. And then you look at your bank account and you say, oh yeah, that's why I don't have it anymore. And then there's this kind of weird moment between you super elated that you're financially secure, but all the purpose and passion has just left your life.
Yes.
So, that's the vacuum. And
what a fascinating
super tense kind of balance there. Yeah. It's weird. And it's an interesting problem to have. You would call this probably one of the best examples of a champagne problem, but it is real, right? It's just like when rich people complain about taxes, there's probably a reason in there somewhere. Like personally, as a German, I just pay 50% tax on anything anyway. I don't care. This is how I was socialized. But like when people have champagne problems, to them, they are just as real as normal problems are to normal people, right? So the reality of how proximate the problem is to your heart and your mind, that's always the same. So that was.
But I think existentially, it's. I mean, not to qualify the problem, because I totally understand what you're saying. There's first world problems, and there's problems of hunger and food and suffering and environment and all of these things. I think in terms of our society, this existential problem that one has when one loses one's center of meaning, that's a very profound thing. And it doesn't matter how anyone else wants to call it or say it, you're going to have the experience, especially I think when you've been working exceptionally hard and you're consumed by something. And I also know that your customers loved you, so you're putting a proper value into the world, and then that's gone as well at that time.
Yeah, that's right. That's the worst part, like not being able to talk to these people anymore. As much as I hate it, like I feel I have like intercom PTSD, like the little chat bubble that goes up, the little sound that it makes. I sometimes when I hear this, I still feel like my heart rate go up, because it reminds me of those days where I needed to respond to this, where I needed to drop everything I was doing and respond. And when they come in an avalanche, because there is like a server problem and hundreds of customers have the same problem, and bim, 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 bim. Oh, it's happening to me right now. So that was not good. That was not enjoyable. But the actual conversations that I had with people after I solved their problem, that I built emotional relationships with my customers, and they with me, because I gave them my time and they gave me theirs. It was there were actual connections made with these people. These were online English teachers just trying to make some money, and they were super happy when you could make their life a little bit easier, and you could feel how it empowered them. Sometimes it empowered them in a way that they didn't even need the product anymore. Like we had people quit on us because the using our product elevated them to a life where they could now find a better job. And I was like, this is awesome. You quit whatever you want. This is great. I helped you find a better job. This is the best thing I've ever done in my life. So you have built these relationships with people, and then you sell it to somebody else, and it's all gone. And I was like, what? So I tried to figure out how to deal with not just the loss of an activity, but the loss of the passion and purpose in my life. And the first thing that we did after we sold the business, obviously we needed to transition it over to the private equity company that we sold it to, but that was easy. We had built a very sellable business, which itself is a topic, but we just automated a lot. We documented a lot. I'm again German. I love documentation, so that was easy for me. And we handed over the business, and we went on vacation, and we went to South Africa. We took this trip to the Kruger National Park and safari and all that. And I was sitting there in the savannah, just looking at giraffes and lions and stuff. And I was like, what am I going to do in the future? It was such a weird
that when it hit
too.
you?
Yeah, it was in this moment of extreme serenity, surrounded by nothing but predators and prey, that I was like, well, I guess this is as basic as it gets. Now I can think about what I actually want to do with my life. And I was like, well, I don't just want to sit on the beach and drink like shots of something all the time. Like, this dream that entrepreneurs have, that I can retire to a beach in my 30s. Nobody wants to spend like 50 years of their life on the beach just with drinks. Like that is super pointless. It's without purpose, without passion. So I was like, what am I going to do? And I remembered that in my attempts to deal with my burnout, during those really, really heavy final days before we even thought about selling, like when stuff was so hard that I was kind of pushing Danielle to think about exiting the company, because she would have she could have continued. She was smart. I was not, but she was setting up systems that helped her to kind of detach from all the stuff. I could not do this. I didn't hire. For some reason, I didn't hire, but it's just, I was sitting there and was like, this is stressing me out. What am I going to do? I started writing. I've never written anything before. I mean, I wrote some stuff in school, but German school, right? But it didn't have anything to do with entrepreneurship or even writing in English or anything like this. But I thought I need some kind of cathartic moment. So I just opened a document and I started writing about the problems that I had and how I would solve them. Just really, as a software engineer, you solve problems by writing stuff. I thought, well, maybe I can do it for my mind as well. So I started writing about my problems that I had with scalability and with customer service automation. And I wrote this 10,000 word blog post just because I thought maybe I'm going to publish it. And it was really just me lamenting my problems and trying to come up with solutions and telling myself how hard it was to do this stuff, which turns out is not a good blog post to publish when you're willing to sell your company. Like, you don't want to tell people how hard it is to run this business when you're actively looking for people to buy it. So it never got published, but I still have it. And I went back to that blog post from my phone in the savannah, because for some reason, if you're in Kruger National Park in South Africa, your mobile phone coverage, your LTE data coverage is spectacular. Like, I had never had better like cell phone reception than looking at a giraffe and a couple of like African wild dogs like hunting their prey. It was bizarre, but I guess there are no people around there, or barely any. So reception from the tower that is somewhere like standing, like looking in the background somewhere. There's not much, there's vegetation, but you got a good signal there. So I was looking at my blog post from that car, and I was like, this was fun. And it had a positive effect on me. And if it has the positive effect on me as somebody who's actively suffering in the situation, if it was cathartic and if it helped me just reflect on how I would solve my problem, well, maybe it's going to have a tiny version of this effect on other people. And that's where the idea of writing came out, like writing as an occupation. And then I said, well, what am I going to write about? Let's think about the things that I witnessed, and I started with the topic list. That's how that whole topic list started. Was just me, Notion document. This is what I did. Oh, I did customer service. Yeah. Oh, coding too. And then I did like CTO stuff. That's interesting. And all the things that I did in the business turned out to be a list of 200 things. And I just thought, I'm going to make a blog out of this. And from that blog came the New Startup Podcast and whatever. So that's how that started. The writing came from me having written something in catharsis, and then figuring out this might just as well be the thing I'm going to do in the future.
It's very beautiful. And I love this idea that the noticing, not just of the problems you have and were having, but also the noticing of the effect it was having on your spirit. Because obviously you're right there at this point where your life has been so filled and there's so much meaning there, and suddenly there's an emptiness there. And I just love this idea. It's that sort of Shakespearean idea that nature abhors a void, hates a void. And but you have to allow something out of you for that refreshing to happen. I mean, I kind of go through that in miniature often during the day, because it's like a computer. Your cache gets filled, and you got to reboot the damn thing. And I don't know, Arvid, what you think, but I look just a tangent here. But I look at the modern world, and I think about the sort of the anger and the madness and the hatred and the polarization, which is the sort of other the other side of the world. And obviously, there's so many causes to this, but I also think that there's so much exhaustion out there that people just aren't able to get this space inside themselves. And of course, often that's because people are having to work so damn hard and the rest of it. But I love this thing when you're just talking about it, that it's so poetic to me that you went out to the savannah, that you allowed there to be a space, and that within that space, there was a noticing and a listening to your spirit, and then the ability to let it impact you and go, okay, if this is happening for me, it could be for another. And then you followed that.
Yeah, I think the reason why I was even thinking about this was that I was already part of this massively positive and empowering community, right? The indie hacker community, of which you, KP, we all kind of are part of this. Like, people who want to do something by themselves independently, but they know they need each other to get there, right? They need to learn from each other and stuff. And that community was always there for me. And I finally realized in that moment how important that community had been in my past, like how my consumption of all these podcasts and these blog posts and just learning from other people, how impactful that had been in my life, and how now in that moment when I was just sitting there looking at that blog post, how I could be one of those people who helped me so much to even get to that point. Right? That's kind of, I reversed that in that moment, and then it was clear to me what I was going to do.
Wow. So the realization was somehow sudden within that space.
Yeah, it's like sometimes you don't know really just how much work goes into something. And you as a musician, you know what that is, right? Like you listen to a song and you think, oh, that's cool. But you don't know the 17 different demos that they tried, the versions before, or the kind of the effects on the guitar that they tried through, like for 14 days trying to find the exact right tone, or, the right plugins or whatever. Like all the work that goes into making something good or something useful, you only ever get to see like the creme de la creme, the final product. Yeah. So it was in that moment that I realized that to all of this knowledge that found its way to me, there was a massive backstory of hardship, of overcoming challenges, of willingness to share, willingness to be vulnerable. All of that was part of this community. And that kind of, it felt like from my eyes in that moment that it wasn't just me reading a book. It was me being the grateful participant in an ongoing conversation around people helping each other. So that's when it clicked. Yeah,
it's so for me, it's what you talk about, this human need to show sort of perfection and the rounded product. It's been so interesting because it's through this whole deconstruction of this fantasy. As someone who comes from the arts and has been on labels, or if I'm doing a documentary, it's kind of really about showing a documentary rather than the process along the way. And so without getting to my story, but I've gone through this sort of whole breaking down of that whole antiquated old world way of doing things. And that's, actually different things that led me there. There's a wonderful book called Share Your Work by Austin Kleon, which I really love, which is a lovely little one of those returnable books. And then finding different people, which actually eventually led me to KP's The Build in Public podcast. It was kind of this whole trail of different stuff that went over a couple of years. And the thing that I've found so wonderful about discovering Build in Public is just this, as you said, okay, on a spiritual level, it's this vulnerability. And it's like my whole life I've been writing the songs, and the final thing's been coming out, and it's like I never ever would have just put out like an iPhone recording. And partly because I didn't grow up with the internet. I didn't grow. Facebook came out when I was like 27. I'm a little bit older than when social media came out, and so you didn't show things ever in that type of way. So I know that the younger generation, there's been this much more sort of open approach and knowing the process, and I've learned so much from all of those people. But that's also led me to the hacking community, and I just love this mentality that I'm coming across of transparency that all of you guys have. And that's why I'm also trying to speak with people like yourself and bring back not just how you're doing it and the why of what you're doing, but just trying to bring back the flair and the fun and the lightness to the artistic community, because it's always so damn hard in the arts. It's so heavy.
Yeah, man. The arts are it's a pretty harsh field. Like my Danielle, like I said, she's a musician, right? She's an opera singer. She was a teacher at that point because she had an injury and she couldn't sing, so she needed a job. And doing that job, we built the software tool to help other people like her that were doing that job. It was purely coincidental. Like she was in Berlin where she met me to sing opera. She was there to perform. There was no idea ever for her to build a software business. That is kind of a side note in her career.
I didn't know about the injury that led to leaving the opera. Oh God, it's just
we were to bargaining here in Canada, and she must have fallen weird. Had a leg injury, couldn't move for a couple months, and that's where all of this started. It was super weird, but that's the kind of just random events leading butterfly effect style to a really interesting outcome. But her whole life has been musical, and she is now a sound engineer. She's actually graduating tomorrow from like sound engineering school. It's really, really
incredible.
Cool. And she's gonna do like post-production work on audio, TV, that kind of stuff. That's her world. That's where she's in. And the more I get exposed to the world of the arts, of the professional arts, of the monetized arts, right, where people make money with artistic work, it's like the system that you see in place, they feel like they're from the 1700s. It's bizarre, like how old-fashioned and traditional. Like if I look into production, because that's also part of her education, like music production, how labels work and how recording studios work, and just how incredibly old-fashioned everything is. It's not surprising that it's hard for the kids, let's just call them that, with this new mentality to suffer, like, because they want to share more. They want to be like be communal in their aspects, but they can't because labels say, no, you can't do that. Actually, I have a little anecdote here from my own life. I'm writing my third book at this point, and it is about building in public. It's funny because Cleon's book, that one that you just mentioned, Show Your Work, that was one of the biggest inspirations for what I wanted to write. I want to write a book about building in public that is not just a small little thing that you can thumb through, but an actual, like a more experience driven, like with stories of people who, like yourself, are building in public, right? People that did it, that are doing it, that are going to do it, and pull this all together into it. It's really nice. But for the first time, I'm looking forward to writing it. I'm already in the process, but this time I'm going to a big publisher. Like the first two books I've self-published, like Zero to Soul, that's the first one that's about my journey with Feedback Panda, and The Embedded Entrepreneur is the second one that's about like finding an audience and building a business from within. So they're both like entrepreneurial books. The third one, I wanted to learn something new and go the big publisher route. So I tried to find an agent. I'm still in the process of like dealing with agents and dealing with publishers and dealing with book proposals and all these weird things that if you want to just write a book, you would never think of. You would never think of, who am I going to sell this to? How do I need to position this for them to buy it? So then I can write it after they bought it, but I still need to already lay out how exactly it's going to be. Like for somebody like me who has this iterative process, like I wrote my second book, like almost completely in feedback with my audience. I had 500 beta readers on my first draft. And with all of these 500 people, I turned the book into something that every single one of them wanted to read. That's a process that in the regular traditional book publishing industry is unheard of and completely illegal. Like they just don't want that, right? And to deal with this as somebody who has this open abundance mindset with people who are very constricted, very secretive, horrible. And the art's just the same.
God, you've just smashed it, and just to because you're so insightful with how you see it. Because I mean, two things. So one thing, it illustrates how competitive and tough it is in the arts. I mean, look, you've had two very successful books. You're proven as a business leader and a bootstrapper. You've built up an audience of like 120,000 people just on Twitter alone, and that's expanded through different things. And it's like, if I was a publisher, I'd be like, man, this guy has got this incredible audience. They are absolutely devoted to it. This is a no-brainer. And you are in a process where, I've no doubt that you'll get there, but it just absolutely blows my mind. And it illustrates so much, because you can imagine, right, you're a start-out writer and you're at the beginning of that road and you're like, how the hell, what am I just, because they always say you've got to build your audience nowadays in order to be able to get the deal. And then you build your audience and you still can't get the damn deal because it's still so competitive. And look, I'm not even saying this in a spirit of complaint. It's an observation of how challenging it is. And my interest is not to complain about the antiquated world or how it is. It's about exploring how us as artists, as creators, can exchange our mentality by fixating on this sort of treasure at the end of the rainbow that never arrives, and instead thinking, okay, how can we bring the spirit of revolution into our own spirits and lives and change ourselves and adapt to the world? And this is what's brought me to you guys, because I'm like, holy hell, these guys, the hackers, the people in the Wild West and on the fringes and just like putting this stuff out on the internet. And then you see someone like Lewis with Audio Pen and suddenly he's just putting it out with love and he's building and he's no coding and it goes out. And I'm like, okay, these are people doing it in a different way. How do I bring that back to this other world, as well as hopefully some stuff from the arts to the founders? So I find that just like, that's so interesting. And the other thing, I just wanted to, because you really inspired me with some of your thoughts there. The other thing is when you release an album. So for instance, I know so many artists who have been on major labels and who've been on major independent labels, and sometimes very well-known artists. And then they can talk, there's this hype beforehand, but it's never about releasing process beforehand. It's kind of like, kind of crappy, all types of stuff that gets put out, but it's not exciting. Like that's the process and what's going on. And then the album's released and it tanks for one reason or another, because 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 albums tank, and then people get dropped. So the process is not allowed into the process of release.
That's right.
And then
That's
everything
exactly
is down on release day. And I was like, for me, after, because I was on EMI, which was where the Radiohead and the Beatles were on, and that was like, that was the apex of my career. And then Universal, like 3 days after I released the album, bought EMI, and so my album was literally released on a Friday, and then I was dropped on the Monday, and that was so I mean, I don't know why, Arvid, they kept Clapton, but they dropped Kroft, and
it's unfortunate,
but it was fine. It's like, I wouldn't change anything, because all of the best things that have ever happened to me in my life of reinventing and redefining myself have happened since then. But I was like, okay, I'm going to find different ways of doing it, and I'm still on that hunt, and it just leads me to you. And so it leads me to the question. So after you started writing, so you had an indie hacker sort of audience. Now, to ask you about to quantify, what was the kind of size of your audience at that stage? I mean, I don't give a damn about metrics, but I'm just interested. Like, had you already built up like a strong Twitter following at that stage, or
Sure.
where were you at that point? And then what happened after you started with the newsletter and the podcast and so on?
That's an interesting one, because when I started on Twitter, I had a Twitter account that I think I started back in 2009, and just used for, Twitter, lurking around, like commenting on random stuff, following random people, friends and family mostly. When I started this whole journey, I had like 400 followers on Twitter. It was
400.
Really
this is after you sold Feedback Panda. 400 followers.
2019. Yeah, that's probably November 15th or 19th, 2019 is when I launched the blog, and from then everything started. I think I had 400 followers then.
So your community, when you say, okay, there was a community there, but you're talking about a really small little tight-knit community.
If at all, like that, it was just random people, really. I don't think I had too many followers from the indie hacker field, because I was just a consumer. Like I said, the realization that the community was so incredibly important came to me after I sold the business, right? So it was something that happened to me that in retrospect, that I understood just how important the community was. One of the benefits, like after we... was it before or after we came back from the vacation? I don't really know. But we went to a conference in Croatia in the same couple months. Must have been around October or something. So there was the MicroConf Europe. MicroConf is a software as a service conference for small software businesses, small SaaS, micro SaaS, right? That's the idea. It's all around Rob Walling and the Tiny Seed accelerator that the MicroConf has been around for many years. I went to the recent one here in Denver a couple months ago. I was on stage talking about mental health for founders, so that kind of brings us all together. That was fun. But back then, I had no connections in the industry other than a couple people, maybe, hopefully, and obviously knowing everybody from the podcast that they were on, right? Like all of those big people that were teaching me through their podcast presence were at that conference. And Danielle and I had the great fortune of giving a little 10-minute attendee talk at this conference, because we had just sold our business. Our acquirer was a co-sponsor of that conference. They were just sponsoring that conference every now and then. And so their CEO was there, and it was the guy who bought our business. And he kind of said, you should really give a little talk. Why not? Like 5 minutes each of you, just talk about like how you built this business so it was sellable. And Rob Walling, the organizer of the conference, he led us on stage, and Danielle and I were there. If you go to my blog, The Bootstrap Founder, you'll find that in the about section, it's one of the only videos I link on the page, is just that 10-minute talk from MicroConf Europe 2019. And we talked about selling the business, and this immediately gave me some credibility in front of a room of one of the most important software as a service founders in the community. Like these people in there was like a couple hundred of them. All of them had software as a service businesses. So all of them knew what the struggle was. All of them had the same dream, sell the company eventually. So I made hundreds of new friends in just 5 minutes that I spent on stage talking. Well, Danielle spent the other 5 minutes talking. So we both made 10 minutes worth of friends. But, the idea was I put myself on the map. And after that, like my Twitter following, I kind of jump-started this by having some kind of credibility thing that I could talk about, some kind of success that I could kind of latch on and say, hey, I'm the guy that, right? That's how I introduced myself in the beginning. And that also gave the blog some kind of initial credibility, because everybody can write about bootstrapping, but not everybody has successfully bootstrapped and then talked about it. So that really helped. So what I'm saying is I had some initial credibility from the sale that helped me bootstrap the audience in a way, right? That helped me build this audience over time.
Yeah.
But 400 people, that's all I had. And
so that's very interesting.
Changed.
So that's a very interesting thing. It's about the sort of the pathway to authority as being one aspect. Let's come back to that. I think that just an observation though, that's a really interesting insight about, because obviously you had built up your authority, I don't like the word, but your presence, because you were proven, you'd done something, wonderful, you toughed it out. It's a damn hard environment, but you found the idea and you run with it. The thing that I find interesting is that at that point, and you've left and you go to the savannah and you're in that space, what am I going to do next? And you have the realization that you love to solve problems and you like to, to notice and then to teach. But also you've got a small audience. Okay, I'm sure it's lovely that you allocate a significant moment to being on that stage. But one stage doesn't change anything. It might help, things can be a catalyst. But what I find interesting from an artistic perspective is that you went into a committed, creative process bound with systems, which you obviously developed along the way, but that you committed to like both serving and creating an audience and recognizing the power in that. And I mean, I just want to point out it's 2023 and you've got 120,000 Twitter followers. I mean, it's an enormous growth through the commitment to that system. And the reason why I'm highlighting it isn't for you, it's for the audience, because you're out there. And I resisted, like I was always like, I'm going to be an artist. I'm going to do my stuff. I'm going to put it out. Value is enough. The love of doing it is enough. But rather similarly to you with Feedback Panda, I knew that I had people that were interested in the work, but I hadn't committed to the audience building in itself. So my sort of big revolution is going, okay, if I want to carry on an artist, I'm not making enough. I mean, I've got my client work for my film work, but I want to do the solopreneur journey and I want to, do all the stuff that I love doing. How the hell am I going to make all of this pay? And okay, what's the method to making it pay? And the thing is what, I'm learning is that people take the audience building seriously. And of course, I understand that that's built firstly on the value of the people and the rest of it. But there's also there's also a recognition, like you said at the start, that it's give and get. There's a process, there's a flywheel between that. And so for me, the sort of, the reason I'm going into this, Arvid, is because artists have this resistance to social media. They know they should be on it. They know that it would help. They know that the world's changed, but they just feel cheapened by it. For right or wrong, it's like there's just something analog about the arts in some type of way. And I was like that for years and years and years. And so I've been breaking down that which I was to try and just do things differently. And I feel things moving differently. And I feel my own spirit lighting as I do this. But I just find it very interesting that to connect the fact that even though you've been so successful, you had hardly an audience, and it was the commitment as you've become a creative to that audience and serving them. And I'd like to just ask you about how you service the community, but you've really shown that it can be done with consistency and the valuing and the sharing. And I find that just really inspiring.
Well, that's great. And let me just throw one thing in here. I have super low expectations. Maybe that helps. Because like one of the things that usually tends to keep me from doing the things that I want is having high expectations and then the threat of not meeting them. With this blog and the podcast and all these things, I was just like, yeah, whatever. Like, I don't need this to be super successful. And I guess the benefit of having sold a business is not needing things to be immediately successful. I know that this is likely not a relatable experience to most people to just have a thing. But as you said, you have client work on the side. You have the means to sustain your life. So being an artist doesn't need to pay immediately. And that I think that is one of the biggest things in this case. You don't need to push yourself to make money, because if you need short-term gains, you sabotage your long-term potential. That's really what that is, right? If you try to sell something today, you're going to sell it at a price that, is just a kind of a discount or whatever over what you could get from a long-term ongoing purchasing relationship with a person, which is why most people in software want to build these software as a service things, because you could charge monthly and the customer just pays every single month, like Netflix, right? To retain access to the service. That is so much more interesting as a monetization model than paying once having somebody pay once and then hoping that they pay at some other point again. Like having this built in, the subscription model is why people are so interested in SaaS. But apart from that, like not needing money immediately allowed me to just explore what I wanted to do with it. And having doing side projects, that's the whole point behind side projects, either being a business or becoming an artist or organizing social change or whatever. Doing this not as your main thing, but doing it on the side allows you to put the focus on it that you need for it to progress without having the threat of it destroying your life if it doesn't work out. Right. So just one word about side projects. And it's funny that you said this, that you're doing video work on the side. So that Star Trek podcast that I talked about earlier, right? The Greatest Generation, the show that self-proclaimed is hosted by two guys who are a little bit embarrassed about having a Star Trek podcast. That is the subtitle of the podcast. These two dudes also I've been listening from episode 1 to what is now episode 600 or something. It's highly popular and has been super consistent. When they started out, they were both video professionals, videographers, working in LA and I don't know where else, I forget, doing the Star Trek podcast on the side, just as a passion project. They had no high expectations, whatever. They just wanted to have a way for themselves to just chat over Star Trek. Like they rewatched the old Star Trek Next Generation from the 90s, and every episode they just like talked about it together. They didn't want to build a business out of it. Yeah. They didn't want to like turn this into a full-time thing. They just wanted to chat and do something for themselves that maybe somebody else could relate to. Now they are having hundreds of thousands of listeners per episode because they resonate so strongly with all these other nerds just like myself who grew up on Star Trek The Next Generation in the 90s, Star Trek Deep Space Nine a couple years later, and Voyager a couple years after that, right? That is what the Star Trek progression is for kids my age. Yeah. And we find in those two guys who are still hosting that podcast and an offshoot podcast talking about the new Star Trek that is out now, so much joy in being able to relate. And I've listened to this every day with my pup, right? For the last couple years at this point. Oh boy. Lovely. And I've listened to them like noticing just how popular the thing is and changing their lives around it. Like they started doing video work on the as main and doing Star Trek on the side. Now Star Trek podcast is their whole thing. Amazing. They got into it by not wanting to build a popular Star Trek podcast. That's how the popular Star Trek podcast happened, right? That's the expectation setting is so important. Just don't expect it to work immediately or at all, and be open to changing both your life or the thing you do to see where it goes. It's a much more flexible process.
It's very inspiring. Thank you for that anecdote with the Trekkies. Because I think with the artists, like the message that I'm trying to put out to artists is to organize oneself and in sort of spiritually, so that you've got the art and the artwork, and that's sacrosanct, and that's okay. You can allow that to be sacrosanct, but then a part of your responsibility, if you like, as an artist, is to not just expect the world to get it. You have to take the responsibility for the messaging. No one else is going to do it. Stop wanting the record exec or the gallery person to do it. Take responsibility for the communication, for the messaging. You are the vehicle, and not only are you the vehicle, but that is the work. It's not just. It's
that is exactly right. Yes, like the distribution of your work is an extremely relevant part of the work. That's the thing. That's the difference between the publishers who just take your glorious production and then they press it on vinyl and they decorate it nicely. No, you do this. This is part of your thing. And then that's go ahead.
I'm so sorry, but and then the third thing being, because I want to ask you about it, because I see you as the master of this, is that within the sharing, within the messaging, and within the communication, there's the third thing, which is the arrival and the audience and the expanding of the audience, but taking care of them one by one. And the thing that I love about you, Arvid, is that you just your love of the community and of sharing and helping is such a part of your motivation, and it just kind of sings out. And I noticed that as well in KP, and that's something I'm so inspired by you. And I know that there's a feedback loop, but I know we've only got a limited amount of time, but I'd love to get your thoughts on community, audience, how you look after them, how you nurture the community, both as individuals and with the ideas, but also in building it as an aspect of your work.
Oh man, So one thing that is so much here. Yeah. One thing that is really core to my understanding of who I am is that I am standing on the shoulders of massive giants in anything that I do. Right? Like any business success that I had, I didn't come up with that. I didn't come up with the programming language that I used. I didn't come up with the idea of building a software business to solve people's problems. I didn't come up with the actual business that the customers that we had that we helped them with. Didn't come up with that. Didn't come up with the idea of, Feedback Panel. That was Danielle's idea. I was just there at the right time to code it. Didn't come up with writing books. Didn't come up with being a podcaster. None of these things are my idea. And all of these things were done probably much better than I'm doing them right now by people who taught me how to do it. So all of these giants that exist everywhere, like Rob Walling is one of them. He allowed me on the floor of the conference, and then and now a couple of weeks ago, like we were just hanging out and talking. I was on his podcast just recently, like reminiscing about the conference, and like he told me that he read my books and is inspired by them. I read his and I'm inspired by his. Like that's the other part. Like these are all giants, but I kind of I take umbrage with the idea of audience conceptually, because I talk about it all the time, but the idea of being on a stage like above the audience and like talking down to them and pleasing them with my serenade of song, it feels like an antiquated way of talking to people. I don't want this. I want to stand amongst them and everybody is dancing, doing their own thing, but we all have a good time. That's what I want. I want to be part of the audience. I want to be a peer to those people around me. I want to be a peer to Rob Walling, the great software entrepreneur who with his podcast is now at episode 670, something, who's been around for a decade plus. And I want to be at the same party talking with the same amount of energy and fervor to the guy who just started their business yesterday. I want to be a part of everybody's lives. I don't just want to look, that's what you said earlier. I don't just want to look up. I want to look all around me, because that's where the party is, right? That's really what it is. Like if you're at a party and you just look up to the ceiling or the stage, you're going to miss all the fun around you. And I don't want that, which is why I focus my time not on only interacting with big accounts. I focus my time on interacting with cool people. And it turns out that cool people come in all different shapes and sizes and at different parts of their journey that they're at. Some are successful, some are just on the verge of starting. Doesn't matter. They're all cool. They're all interesting. And over time, it's also what I said in the beginning with the selflessness. I don't know if the person that I'm talking to today, 5 years from now, is going to be a millionaire and just invite me to their yacht because they had this big exit to Google or something. So why would I risk not having this cool time with this cool person and just talk to somebody established? Like that's how I see community. Community is something that is a peer group, not just a hierarchy of people.
I find it such a beautiful visualization of the breaking down of the walls and not even looking at it as an audience, because it's not only for that just being beautiful as a sort of more of an osmosis exchange rather than a leader speaking to people, but also it's like whether you're a founder, whether you're starting out trying to build a business, taking a risk, and you've left your job, or you're on the cusp of it and you're like, I'm gonna give this a damn crack, or you're an artist. But the other thing you have to deal with is tremendous loneliness. And if you're building down that wall psychologically with the people that you're dealing with, you are inviting the world into your heart, and I think that's really inspiring. And I just, there's so much here. Look, I just wanted to, because I know we've got limited time, so I just wanted to ask you a last question, if that's okay, Arvid.
Sure, of course.
About your podcasting. So a lot of people have been interested with you've got this insane consistency, and one of the things, so you do it every single week. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that you're not just doing the interviews, which I think are every 2 weeks generally.
No, every week too.
Oh, but I
interview every week.
Oh, sorry.
So I have two podcast episodes a week. That's
right. Yes, two. Oh man. Okay, because I really enjoy your teaching, and I'm really inspired. I've been thinking about that as well, about the teaching, or that you're going into an idea and you're breaking it down, and they're a bit shorter. So you're actually doing those. So what day do you release that and the interviews?
Sure. So my interviews go out on Wednesdays. I tend to edit them over the weekend or on Fridays, because it's really like I record them through Riverside or something. I get both audio and video feeds. I just put them into DaVinci Resolve. I edit it myself because I enjoy it, and it's part of my idea finding process, sometimes being part of a prior conversation that I participating in or had participated in gives me new ideas on what to write about. So I do all
Because
the
I love
editing
that.
by myself.
Yeah, because you kind of riff off ideas that come out in the
exactly.
podcast. That's such a great process.
Yeah, and that makes it much easier to come up with cool stuff that is relevant, because when I talk to other people, their new ideas that I've never thought about before tend to be something that I probably have a perspective on that my audience finds interesting. So I take these things and I put them into my big list. Like whenever I go through a podcast and whenever I edit it, I kind of revisit them. So those go out on Wednesdays, because I also have people who help me with like transcription and that kind of stuff. I have a thumbnail designer that helps me with the thumbnail, because I'm not a good visual designer, but most of the editing and obviously the interview conducting, that's all me. And then the topic of that Friday episode, where I do my 10 to 20 minute solo thing, is usually dictated either by the interview or by anything happening in the community at this point. So I have 2 episodes. One is short, one is rather long, an hour, 10 minutes, both of them. That's my routine. And the thing I was talking about, the writing in the week that happens on a Monday, that is usually for the Friday episode, because the interview is a conversation, right? And a conversation you don't need to write for. I do research. I do that whenever I feel like it on people that I interview, but it tends to be more conversational, just like this, although you've done ample preparation as well. But it's never like a question answer thing.
But I find it so. And did you you're so well? It's lovely how relaxed you are when you come on the podcast. You're obviously so experienced, and you've got to that level of expertise with it. Were you tentative to start with? Would you get nervous before your podcast if you're interviewing someone bigger in the space? How was the psychological development there?
That was so hard. Like I think I had 170 or 180 episodes of solo before I ever started interviewing people.
Did you?
Like it was one of those things that I was so scared of, because
Really?
not only, like we talked about burnout and being stressed and me keeping my calendar empty. That is on purpose, because I did not ever want to get into the situation where I had a deadline or any kind of pressure on my life again. Right? That was a compensatory reaction to being overwhelmed with work. Was I don't want to have to do anything ever again, hence empty calendar. So when I then introduced recording dates with people where I would have to show up just like now at a certain point and not only talk about the things that I know, but try to navigate a conversation. And you definitely know what that feels like, right? It's a lot of work. It's probably the most draining work you can have as a person, is to keep a conversation going for an hour and make it entertaining. Like I know what that feels like, which is why it's so nice to see what a natural you are, or what a natural you appear to be. But like there's lots of work going into that too. And being both comfortable and confident in your ability to lead a conversation. So that was a lot of pressure in the beginning, particularly as I'm not a native speaker. So I need to have my translation mode on, because sometimes words are lacking and I need to translate them from German into English as well during a conversation while something is flowing in. It is a lot of pressure, right? It's so much more work than writing a thing and putting it onto a teleprompter and narrating it into a camera. I can do this like eyes closed. Shouldn't, because I still need to read my script, but it's very, very easy to do compared to an interview with like people who I admire. Like every single person that comes on my podcast is somebody who I have a prior relationship with. Like I never have random people on. It's always either somebody introduced me to them, we chat, and then we have this conversation, or I've been following them for like a decade, and then
it's one
now
chance.
I get to talk to them. Yeah, it's such a high pressure moment. So that was hard to overcome, but I decided that mostly because I was lonely. You were kind of talking about this. So I said that Danielle was spending most of the last year in school for audio engineering. And that school is not in our little tiny town that we live in. It's 40 minutes away. So she was spending most of her days there. And even if she was here, she was working on projects because it was a really tough program for her. So I was alone. I had the puppy, but the puppy can't talk to me, right? So I can only cuddle, which I do a lot with her. But I felt I want to live a life that is not just me sitting in front of my computer not talking to people. I want to live a life that is me sitting in front of my computer talking to people. That was the idea. So I just kind of rang up the other founders that I knew that I always chatted on Twitter with anyway, and I said, hey, do you have an hour? Do you want to talk about this topic? And they all said, sure, that's awesome. Lovely. So I got a camera, I got a setup, I built my little studio in the basement, which is now being redone, renovated, and that's kind of how it started. It was just like me not wanting to be alone every single day of the week, having conversations with cool people. And then I had those conversations, and here we are.
What a pathway. And so like just one follow-up question, like if like with your research, especially early on, like would you overcompensate with research? Like did you have trust in your ability? Because I talked with KP about it, and KP's, he's such a sort of natural spirit, and he's like, Jim, it's just jazz, it's a great conversation, all the best ones I have, I'm prepared for. And I'm like, bloody hell, So with you, how was it for you with the research side, and how much you look into someone's life, at the start when you're with someone who's bigger in the space and you're a bit nervous, let's say?
Oh boy. And particularly for the real big people like that were running like $1 million businesses. I was talking to Patrick Campbell, is the best example. Like he recently sold his business for $200 million. And I talked to him like after that acquisition about mental health in acquisition and stuff, like $200 million, like a 9-figure exit. Talk to a person like this, it was crazy. But what I figured out is I don't need to do like a deep dive into people that I already have a prior relationship with, because I understand what they are about. I know what they've been tweeting about in the past. And with Patrick, it was always about pricing. So we talked a lot about that. And we talked a lot about the exit that he also publicly shared. So I gravitate towards people that already kind of give me a lot of stuff in our regular day-to-day that I can then remember. And I guess more from a technical perspective, best investment I ever made as a podcast interviewer was a teleprompter. A teleprompter with an iPad underneath and Notion as my document. Like if I were to, right now I could pull up Notion and still look you in the eye while I scroll through my notes.
Oh,
and that
clever.
I could even go to a website and look up certain things as I nod and look you in the eyes. That is one of, like, if you do a lot of Zoom meetings for whatever reason, for your job, or if you do interviews, anything with a camera, if you want to increase your level of just being comfortable in being in the moment, get a prompter, put a screen underneath, and just have your notes or whatever right there on screen, so you never have to break eye contact.
That's a fantastic tip. Thank you, because half the time I'm here and you can see, look so far, Arvid, I got all of these everywhere. So my very final question is, it's just about digital, or it's just about digital products, because you started out and you went out and you got busy with writing, and you got busy with helping people, and busy with building and public, and people were listening and interested, and your energy comes across. But also that doesn't pay, at least until the audience gets very big in and of itself. So you had a pathway towards writing books and creating, you have a Twitter course, and so I just wanted to, because I'm trying to find different ways. I'm trying to go as a solopreneur, trying to break down the traditional way of relying on CDs or vinyls as a musician, all the rest of it. And I'm really kind of inspired how in the business community, they're using digital products and giving great value. And I just wanted to ask just about what your pathway there is, because I think a lot of artists and creatives are underestimating the power of the information that they've accrued through their lives and their expertise, and how they can utilize it, and the fact that there might be an audience out there for them. So just a few comments on that. If you were to say to me, and as a struggling artist, look, here is why I think this would be a potential or interesting pathway, or whatever it is that you do think about it.
Here's the thing, like with my books in particular, the first book I didn't even intend to write. I just had a blog, and people told me they really like my blog posts. I was like, cool. And then I kept writing blog posts, and they were all different topics, right? And I'm gonna get to the what you can do as an artist in a second. But they were all so many different topics that at some point I decided, well, there needs to be like a space that pulls them all together. So I created a little compendium, a little guide, right, where I would say, here's how you start your journey. Here's the article for that particular topic. Here's, if you think about technical stuff, here are the 5 articles to that topic. And if you ever get to sell your business, here is my knowledge on that link to that article. And I kind of filled it up, and it was a compendium, which means like little paragraphs for each topic. And where I had an already existing blog post, I would just link the post. And where I didn't, I would just write out the paragraph with my basic thoughts about the topic. And people really liked that. And I called this First Initial Guide 0 to Sold. That was its name. And then people said, well, if this ever becomes a book, I would totally buy it. I would buy the book right now if it existed. And I was like, well, that's kind of cool. Maybe if somebody tells me they're going to buy my book, I should write the book. One of those people that told me that was Andrew Gazdecki. He's the founder of acquire.com, which is an acquisition platform for software businesses. So he had a lot of success in the past building SaaS businesses, and he saw in me somebody who had something to share, and he told me, hey, I want to read this book. I'm interested in your perspective. And I still have this tweet somewhere in my bookmarks because it was such a moment of, okay, if this guy thinks I should write, then I should really write the book, not just the blog post, but the book. And I had half the book done already because the blog posts were there. So I kind of pulled it all together, turned this into a self-published book, had an editor look into it, a proofreader, and somebody designed the cover, somebody that was actually Danielle and I, but it was very professionally designed. And then I published it, and people loved it because it was built in the community already. Half of it was written in public. So the other parts I just spent a month writing and pulled it all together, had alpha readers, had people help me out. And that's where the book happened. That's where the monetization happened. It happened because people saw something in my work that they wanted more of. And I just kept pulling the thread. Right. And I did it in a way that wasn't just behind the scenes. I just shared with them whatever I did. I said, I'm going to list this on Amazon. Anybody got any ideas how to do that? Got a couple links. Okay, here's how I listed my book on Amazon. Screenshots here, screenshots there. Here's the first day of sales. Looks like this. And here's what I'm trying to do now. I'm going to do an audiobook. I'm going to hire somebody to do this. Here's where I'm going. I shared every single step along the way.
Oh, that's so cool. I love it.
Yeah, it was super enjoyable. Did the same thing with the second book because people told me in response to the first book, hey, I love your book. This is the part where I would like to know more. And I got a massive amount of people who or a number of people who told me, this exact part is where I need to know more. And that was around audience building. That was around like finding the right people to serve, right? Which is why the Embedded Entrepreneur is so focused on audience building and building from within communities, because that was the thing in my first book that most people wanted more of. I just followed the feedback from the community. And that has helped me tremendously because that led to my Twitter course, which I started at, I think, 48,000 followers, and I finished at 60-some thousand followers. And now it's twice that. Like, if there's anything to prove that the stuff works that I talk about, it's the amount of people that I gained while I was recording it, right? As a following. But that's kind of how it happens. It happens through community immersion.
Yeah, and it's just so incredible how then you've got this feedback loop between giving value and people being fascinated in the process, and then the process leading to you to creating things, and then creating things, and then that actually leading to revenue, and it becoming this lovely cycle. So there we are. What a wonderful cycle and sort of concept to end with. I'm so very, very thankful for all of the insight. I feel like I've got so much to think about from this podcast, and I know everyone that hears it will feel the same. Thank you so much, Arvid.
It was really nice chatting with you. I was so excited for this because your enthusiasm is so palpable, both in the work that you do on Twitter and in our conversation right now. I think I'm really grateful for having this opportunity to finally talk about stuff in a more artistic and human level. It's not just business stuff. It's not just numbers. It's a bit more about the people behind it.
Yeah, well, I think there's, and I love what you said about sort of love languages and the way you express it. And I think there's also an audience out there for you, because one of the things I'm trying to do is to bring the work of people like yourself back to the arts. So if there's, I wonder if there's a little idea in there for you.
Maybe.
Before we go, if there was to be, just to sum up a message to people out there, someone's out there struggling or just starting something or just about to leap, what would Arvid Kahl say to them, just as a little package message for goodbye?
Well, the many things we struggle with come from our own inflated expectations, and overcoming our imposter syndrome and our fear of failure. It's probably one of the most important steps that we could take as a creator. Stuff will not work out sometimes it will work out. It doesn't all have to be hits. I think that's an important part. Not everything you do needs to be perfect, but everything you do needs to just make you a little bit better. When I started writing my first articles, you can find them on my blog, they're pretty horrible, but they were good enough at that point to tell people who were really in need of something that it helped them a little bit. And that's all you can do. Like that's really, if you inflate your expectations, you're going to suffer. But if you just want to help one person a day, a tiny little bit, it's all you need. Do this for 365 days and you've helped over 300 people. And do this over time. These people will never forget. 3 years, you've helped 1,000 people. And if you follow Kevin Kelly's advice to get 1,000 true fans, which is an article that I highly recommend, the idea is you don't need to find millions of people who listen to your music or you look at your work. You just need to find a really, really strong core group of believers and help them with the thing that they want, and they will help you with the thing that you want. So community is everything. Manage your expectations by just not inflating them, and trust in the process of consistent work that just improves a little bit every single day.
What a beautiful message. Thank you, Arvid.
Thank you.
Wir sehen uns.
Wir sehen uns. Ciao.
Ciao. Bye-bye.